Below is a more detailed extended rewrite, approximately 4 times longer, while preserving the same story arc and improving grammar and style. It adds background, context, and descriptive elements to enrich each scenario. Welcome aboard YarnHub's Flight Video Marathon. Welcome to this special showcase of some of our most memorable flight videos. True, some might say our earlier animation style leaves something to be desired, and they're not entirely wrong. You'll notice aircraft defying normal physics, masks that mysteriously lack air hoses, and eyes that look a bit too large or oddly positioned. But we believe these quirks give our animations a certain unique charm, like discovering a treasured old storybook whose illustrations have an endearing homemade quality. So sit back, relax, and immerse yourself in YarnHub's finest flying tales. If you happen to catch a glimpse of our elusive cat mascot, sometimes hidden in a scene as an inside joke, we'd love it if you'd point that out in the comments. Takra, a legendary B-17, the All-American, February 1st, 1943. Our first tale takes us back to the early months of 1943, right into the skies over North Africa during the Second World War. On February 1st, 1943, Lieutenant Ken Bragg, Jr. pilots a B-17F Flying Fortress named the All-American. Alongside him in the cockpit is Lieutenant Godfrey Engel, Jr., serving as co-pilot. With the rest of their 10-man crew, they are part of a larger formation tasked with striking the German-controlled port of Tunis. The Allies hope to stifle the Axis resupply effort in North Africa by bombing key ports and infrastructure. The treacherous route to Tunis. During the approach, a swarm of Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters makes repeated, slashing attacks on the B-17 formations. Defensive machine guns roar to life, tracers lancing into the bright African sky. Each wave of Bf-109s probes for weaknesses, sometimes managing to inflict dangerous damage on the bombers. Despite the harassment, the formation pushes on toward the heavily defended target zone, where flak guns are already zeroed in. Just short of the target, the Bf-109s peel away, allowing the ground batteries to take over. Braving heavy flak bombardier, Ralph Burbridge, positioned in the B-17's iconic plexiglass nose, takes command as they near the final bombing run. With flak bursting thick and violent, the aircraft rocks wildly under repeated concussions. Yet the crew presses on, and Burbridge delivers their bombs over the seaport. The All-American, along with the rest of the formation, then starts back toward friendly territory. Their mission seems a success, but as soon as they're clear of the fiercest anti-aircraft fire, fresh threats appear in the form of more Bf-109s. The final 2 Bf-109s. Just when the danger seems to subside, 2 Messerschmitts show up, each piloted by seasoned German aces. One zeroes in on the lead bomber in the squadron, but the gunners on the All-American concentrate their fire on it, hitting the 109's engine and forcing it to break off. It trails smoke and oil before spiraling into the desert below. The other, known as Yellow One, closes on the All-American itself, flown by a fearsome pilot named Eric Paxia, an ace with multiple kills to his credit. Paxia attempts a head-on pass, planning to roll beneath the bomber for a second approach. But the All-American's nose gunner unleashes round after round. The 109, hammered by bullets, fails to execute the roll. Possibly injured, losing control, or hampered by mechanical malfunctions, Paxia's fighter smashes into the B-17's fuselage in a hideous collision of screeching metal. The impact shakes the aircraft like an earthquake, ripping a massive hole and throwing fragments of steel, glass, and aluminum throughout the cabin, or holding it together. Lieutenant Bragg wrestles with the controls, half expecting the plane to break apart. Crewmen dazedly pick themselves up and realize the entire tail section is nearly severed, held on by only a few skeletal pieces of the airframe and twisted cables. Amazingly, no one on board the B-17 is fatally wounded. Gunner Sergeant Sam Sarpoulos, stuck in the tail turret during the collision, carefully crawls forward along the only surviving structural beams, dragging parachutes, personal gear, and Lieutenant Bragg's jacket as he goes. Everyone braces for the worst, convinced the tail might tear away at any second. Remarkably, the All-American keeps flying. With the rest of the formation reducing speed to protect it, the B-17 limps back across Allied lines. When it finally touches down at Biskra airfield, ground crews are astounded to see a near-severed fuselage. Photographs of this battered bomber become iconic, symbolizing both the robust design of the flying fortress and the indomitable will of its crew. Miraculously, the plane later returns to action after extensive repairs, further cementing the All-American as a legend of Waibutu aviation. Robert S. Johnson's Perilous Dogfight, June 26, 1943. Fast forward a few months to the summer of 1943, the Allied air campaign intensifies over German-occupied France, with the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, often called the Jug, now taking a leading role. 3 squadrons of P-47C Thunderbolts slice through the morning sky toward France on June 26th. One of the pilots, Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, flies near the rear of the formation. The unseen threat. These Thunderbolts are on a sweep, looking to intercept or harass any Luftwaffe aircraft. Suddenly, Johnson catches sight of suspicious movement in the upper reaches. He warns his comrades, "Bandit, 5 o'clock." But there's no response, possibly due to radio issues. Before he can fix the radio, 16 Focke-Wulf FW-190s dive from above, tearing into the unsuspecting P-47s with fearsome cannon fire. Johnson's cockpit is riddled with bullets. Rounds blow out sections of the canopy and smash his oxygen line, splattering hot oil and hydraulic fluid across the dials and instrument panels. Flames briefly flare inside the cockpit, scorching his face and arms. The plane begins a deadly spin as the entire tail section dips. Wrestling the Jug. Despite the chaos, Johnson refuses to bail out. He fights the controls, eventually leveling his P-47 at a lower altitude. He tries to open the canopy for an emergency exit, but it's jammed, warped by bullet strikes. Trapped, battered, and short on oxygen, he must attempt a return flight. While scanning for friend or foe, his heart drops as he spots a dreaded yellow-nosed FW-190, typically flown by an ace or an elite pilot. A deadly game. The FW-190's cannons spew shells that further riddle Johnson's Thunderbolt. Resourcefully, Johnson yanks back on the throttle and stomps the rudder to force the FU-190 to overshoot. The German pilot briefly pulls alongside, performing a salute that seems almost chivalrous, until he circles back around to strafe Johnson's crippled aircraft multiple times. Machine gun bullets pepper everything from wingtips to engine cowling, yet in a miraculous twist, not a single slug delivers a mortal hit. Finally out of ammo, the FW-190 pilot salutes once more and departs, leaving Johnson alive in his bullet-riddled plane. With half the aircraft shredded, Johnson wrestles the controls until he can land safely at an Allied airstrip. He emerges with severe burns, hydraulic fluid irritation in his eyes, and a piece of his nose grazed. Within days, he's back in the cockpit. Johnson later achieves 27 confirmed victories, making him the second highest scoring U.S. ace in the European theater. The encounter cements his heroic reputation and underscores the resilience of the Thunderbolt. Norwich, The Tuskegee Airmen, the first jets, March 24, 1945. By 1945, the Allies have gained clear air superiority over most of Europe, yet Germany unveils its revolutionary Messerschmitt Me-262 jet, a plane capable of speeds well beyond Allied fighters. On March 24th, a group of P-51D Mustangs, flown by the famed Tuskegee Airmen of the 332nd Fighter Group, escort heavy bombers toward Berlin. Spotting the contrails. Captain Roscoe Brown, at just 23, leads a flight scanning the clear horizon. Contrails high above signal a formation of over 24 Me-262s. Instantly, Brown instructs his flight to drop external fuel tanks, giving the Mustangs greater agility. Within moments, a chaotic swirl of jets and Mustangs erupts, with each side trying to line up a decisive firing pass. Brown's triumph. Brown sights an Me-262 piloted by a 10-kill Luftwaffe ace. Timing his approach, Brown fires 3 short bursts of 50 caliber fire, each burst carefully aimed. The Me-262's right fuselage and engine ignite, sending debris and flame streaming behind it. The pilot, desperately losing control, ejects and parachutes safely to the ground below. More Red Tail victories. Meanwhile, Second Lieutenant Charles Brantley becomes the second African-American pilot of the day to shoot down an Me-262. He catches another jet on the edge of the fray and skillfully lands several hits on the speeding target. First Lieutenant Earl Lane does the same with a third Me-262, relying heavily on the advanced K-14 lead computing gun sight to factor in speed, distance, and the angle of deflection. Within minutes, the Tuskegee Airmen have destroyed 3 German jets, proving not only their aviation prowess, but also dealing another blow to racial barriers back home. Some historians note that the introduction of the Me-262 was too late and in too few numbers to turn the tide for the Luftwaffe. Nonetheless, the technological leap it represented shaped future jet fighter development, both east and west, in the coming Cold War. For a more in-depth dive into this era, Me-262 versus P-51 Mustang by Robert Forsyth is an excellent resource. Nocturne clashes over MiG Alley, 1951, Korean War. Just 5 years after WW2, global tensions resurface in Korea. The Korean peninsula becomes a flashpoint between communist forces, backed by the Soviet Union and China, and a UN coalition, led by the United States. A new era of jet warfare dawns, with the advanced Soviet MiG-15, pitted against the North American F-86 Sabre. The fierce aerial battles center on a region along the Yalu River, which American pilots famously dub MiG Alley. Soviet pilots in disguise. Many Soviet pilots secretly participate, wearing Chinese uniforms and using Chinese markings on their MiGs. They attempt to speak Chinese on the radio, though when combat intensifies, they revert to Russian for clarity. U.S. forces soon realize that a select few Chinese aces demonstrate skill levels far beyond standard training. Factu. Sergei Casey Jones, Kramarenko. Among these hidden Soviet flyers is Sergei Kramarenko, nicknamed Casey Jones by American pilots, in reference to his uncanny abilities. In mid-1951, Kramarenko nearly downs a U.S. World War II ace, Le-2, Cole Glenn Eagleston, who manages to nurse his heavily damaged Sabre to a rough landing. Later, Kramarenko tangles with multiple Sabres over Anju, where he is forced to eject after taking devastating hits. He survives and is honored as a hero of the Soviet Union. While exact kill-loss ratios remain debated, historians suggest that the Sabre proved a formidable match for the MiG-15, with a kill ratio near 1.4 to 1 against elite Soviet pilots. In total, the U.S. lost 224 F-86, while 566 MiG-15s were claimed destroyed. Kramarenko lives until May 2020, remaining one of the last living links to those dramatic engagements. Nunar. Captain Jesse Fulmar, the Corsair vs. MiG-15, September 10, 1952. As the Korean War rages on, the venerable Chance Vought F-4U Corsair, a piston-engine fighter once dominant in the Pacific theater of U-2, now faces the far more modern MiG-15 jet. On September 10, 1952, two Corsairs from Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 312, the Checkerboards, cruise across North Korean skies. Lead pilot, Captain Jesse Fulmer, joined by wingman First Lieutenant Willie Daniels, are en route to a bombing mission when they spot two MiG-15s barreling toward them. A desperate dogfight. Seeing they're hopelessly outclassed in speed, Fulmer and Daniels jettison bombs and external fuel tanks, trying to gain whatever agility they can. Initially, two MiGs dive on them, but soon more appear. The Corsairs set up a defensive weave. Fulmer lines up one MiG in his sights and fires a stream of 20mm shells, punching into the jet's fuselage. Thick, dark smoke gushes from the stricken MiG, whose pilot ejects over farmland. But the fight isn't finished. More MiGs converge, and one riddles Fulmar's aircraft, shearing off part of his left wing and knocking out his aileron. Knowing he can't land safely, Fulmar radios an urgent mayday. He ejects just before his Corsair plummets into the Yellow Sea. His wingman Daniels speeds away, successfully outpacing the rest of the MiGs. Rescuers arrive a mere 10 minutes later, saving Fulmar from the waters. Awarded the Silver Star and a Purple Heart, Fulmar becomes the first U.S. Marine pilot credited with downing a MiG-15. He eventually returns home and lives until 2004, passing at the age of 83. Bob Pardo, the famous Pardo's Push, March 10, 1967. Shifting to the Vietnam War, we find another epic demonstration of aerial bravery and ingenuity. On March 10, 1967, four F-4 Phantom IIs from the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, 4th or 3rd Tactical Fighter Squadron, lift off from an air base in Thailand. Their mission: strike steel mills in the heavily defended Hanoi region. Leading an element is Captain Bob Pardo, with Lieutenant Steve Wayne in the back seat. Flight number 4 is piloted by Captain Earl Amon and Lieutenant Bob Houghton. Monitor over the target. Reaching Hanoi, the Phantoms face thick, accurate anti-aircraft fire. Amon's jet sustains severe damage, leaking fuel at an alarming rate, while Pardo's F-4 also takes hits. Both planes turn for Laos, intending to meet a KC-135 tanker. Before long, Amon radios the grim reality. He won't have enough fuel to leave North Vietnamese airspace. Ejecting over enemy territory all but guarantees capture and a long stint as prisoners of war. The unthinkable plan: Bob Pardo refuses to abandon Amon. Spotting a risky solution, Pardo maneuvers behind Amon's jet, attempting to push it mid-air. Initially, he tries to use the Phantom's nose to nudge Amon's tail, but the airflow and turbulence prove too unstable. Then, remembering the F-4's design origins in Navy service, he orders Amon to lower the tail hook. Very carefully, Pardo positions the hook against the thick windshield glass in front of him. Despite repeated slippage and cracking glass, Pardo's Phantom manages to slow Amon's descent, carrying both planes about 88 miles into Laotian airspace. Final escape. As Pardo's engines begin flaming out, one is on fire and the other is starved of fuel, both crews decide to bail out. Pardo's last-second maneuver is enough to place Amman and Houghton over friendlier territory, and minutes later, all 4 airmen successfully parachute into Laos. They hide from local militia until rescue helicopters whisk them to safety. Initially, the Air Force considers reprimanding Pardo for risking and losing a multi-million-dollar jet, but the charges are dropped. 20 years later, Pardo and Wayne finally receive Silver Stars in recognition of their courage. Dr. The Gulf of Sidra Incident, August 18, 1981. Nearly 2 decades after Vietnam, the geopolitical stage has shifted again. The Cold War is still on, and America finds itself in a tense standoff with Libya over the Gulf of Sidra. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi declares the entire Gulf as sovereign Libyan territory, whereas the U.S. recognizes those waters as international. An American carrier group sails defiantly through, launching F-14 Tomcats to enforce freedom of navigation. Day 1. Cat and Mouse. On August 18, 1981, the first day of the operation, numerous Libyan MiG-25s approach the carrier task force, but are quickly deterred when they see the advanced Tomcats forming a defensive screen. U.S. pilots, who operate in disciplined pairs, often close in to within visual range, wave at the Libyans, and watch them peel off to avoid conflict. The day ends without a single shot fired, prompting some Tomcat crews to label it an almost playful cat-and-mouse game. Day 2. Real fire. The next morning, Commander Henry Kleeman, callsign Fast Eagle 102, and Lieutenant Larry Music Muchinski, Fast Eagle 107, are on patrol when a contact zips onto their radar. Closing in, they see 2 Libyan Su-22 fitters speeding straight toward them. Muchinski's radar inexplicably goes on the fritz, forcing him to rely on visual sighting. Suddenly, one Su-22 fires a missile at Kleeman, which misses as Kleeman jinks hard to the left. Kleeman lines up a Sidewinder missile shot, waiting for the Libyan pilot to break away from the blinding sun. Once the fighter banks, Kleeman's missile tracks perfectly, shredding the Su-22. The pilot ejects safely. Meanwhile, Muchinski fixes on the other Su-22, launching one Sidewinder that flies astray. Seconds later, that same missile inexplicably reacquires the Libyan jet, impacting the fuselage. Muchinski yanks back on the stick to avoid debris. Both Libyan pilots survive, rescued by their own forces. The entire incident, from first missile to second kill, lasts mere moments. Aftermath. Legacy Kleeman and Muchinski land safely, reporting the first Navy air-to-air kills since Vietnam. The political aftermath is tense, but no major escalation follows. Both Tomcats receive minimal official recognition, no special medals, though they become folk heroes among Navy aviators. The encounter influences Hollywood as well. Producers draw upon various U.S.-Libyan incidents when scripting the iconic movie Top Gun. Years later, one of the F-14s involved, Fast Eagle 102, is restored by veterans and placed on display at the Midland Army Airfield Museum in Texas. Visitors today can stand face-to-face with a piece of Cold War history that once soared above the Gulf of Sidra, launching missiles that changed the course of an international standoff. Narafern. Wrapping up, thank you. You've made it to the end of our extended marathon. Thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed the deeper dive into these extraordinary aviation stories spanning the skies of World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and even Cold War showdowns. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to Yarn Hub. We release improved videos every Friday, each one crafted with the same dedication to telling compelling historical tales. We appreciate every viewer, and we're committed to continuing our journey as long as people keep watching. Once again, don't forget to leave a comment if you spot our stealthy cat mascot hidden somewhere in our videos. Your support motivates us to push the boundaries of animation and storytelling, quirks and all. Thank you, and we'll see you in our next installment of captivating tales from the vaults of aviation history.